lying in bed, just like Brian Wilson did. I heard it again. I don't remember where, but isn't it amazing that the Beach Boys could make all that beautiful, harmonious, uplifting music while their frontman was such a mess, so depressed. And contextually, the Beach Boys were active through the 1960s, 1961 through the end of the decade, doing their best work. And this was the decade of the civil rights movement. This is elsewhere in the country, the Baptist Street church bombing. The KKK blew up a church and killed 4 little black girls in 1963. This is the civil rights movement and the struggle and the Edmund Pettus Bridge crossing and the civil rights legislation getting done in 65, and then the long, hot summer of 1967 when there were 150 or more race riots. And they're producing this wonderful music. Wilson's mental illness is legendary. The Bare Naked Ladies famously penned a song about his breakdown. 3 years lying in bed, gaining weight and doing drugs and possibly being exploited by his therapist. The exact meaning of the song, it just escapes me now, although it's playing nearly constantly in my head, especially the refrain. Lying in bed. Lying in bed just like Brian Wilson did. Lying in bed like Brian Wilson did. Is Steve Page admitting to some melancholia, some distress? Or just a bleak period in his writing? Or is he trying to say something about Wilson rather than himself, or even about culture at large? I don't know. That's not my immediate concern. What I'm thinking about right now is the idea that Wilson was brilliant despite his psychological problems. What if his widely acknowledged brilliance is less in spite of his depression and purported mania than part of the whole package? His suffering is internalization made him a mind-blowing composer and writer, an innovative producer. They also made him self-destructive and prone to sometimes dangerous melancholy. Like MacLean says of Van Gogh, I could have told you, Vincent, that this world was never meant for one as beautiful as you. I suppose it's possible to create beauty by contemplating happy thoughts and being straight-laced and stable, but the best art, the most profound art, seems to come from this other place. A hurt, heartfelt suffering, lonely, reaching out, isolated, unique, universal place. A place where love and pain are one thing. A place where we ache to die because living makes us ache. Brian Wilson's subject matter was about girls, sunshine, surfing, blue skies and innocent love, but listen to the haunting harmonies and the melodies. Hear him crying out. Pain and beauty are not mutually exclusive, they're practically the same thing. How many of our favorite artists experience mental illnesses like depression or bipolar disorder? And how many cannot work if they're treated or cured? Art is a razor. On the one side is the expression of what's important, of what the rest of us cannot see without the artist. On the other side is death. How many have cut themselves? When somebody makes beautiful things or ugly ones that call out to us, should we worry? Should we worry for them? Should we try to hear the pain behind the melody, entwined in the harmony? Or should we just accept the gift of beauty we have been given? What would be the cost to us if we intervened and cured our artists of their hurts? Those who are hurting, what would be the cost to them? Yes, Derek. Dr. Blackpill, are you saying that if someone feels like dying, you should literally let them die for the sake of art? Dude, obviously not. If someone is literally suicidal, then obviously help them. If someone has a clinical case of depression and could benefit from some kind of therapy, absolutely, we should provide that. But nothing's ever free. Everything comes at some kind of cost. And we're living in a place where people aren't getting their depression diagnoses from licensed professional counselors or clinical psychologists. People are getting their depression diagnoses from family practitioners based on one score on the Beck Depression Inventory and no knowledge really of how to interpret that, and only one recourse, which is drugs. They keep in the free samples in the cabinet back behind the doctor's desk because Pfizer Pharmaceuticals is there twice a week, every week, virtually bribing them to prescribe drugs. Just nothing's ever free, and be more careful. Of course, Robin Williams would probably have been an even better comic if he wasn't coked up out of his mind all the time. Of course, artists do their best work when they are in a stable place and not abusing substances. But there's always a cost to everything. Art can be construed as seeing the things other people don't see, or in a way that they don't see them, finding a novel way to convey something about phenomena, not to perfectly replicate the mountains in paint. Any technically competent person can do that, and a photographer can do it goddamn better. No, to convey something about what it was like to sit and see those mountains. And pain is part of that, like it or not, for better or worse. Pain is part of every experience. When I see something beautiful, it's so beautiful that it hurts. And that is a goddamn razor blade. Counterpoint. That the last video about suffering in art, I'm not sure I believe everything that's in it. I feel something about this, but counterpoint. Here we go. Artists see the world with a different perspective than other people. Their work stands out because of this eye. It can draw us in, it can be repulsive. Thomas Kincaid, love or hate, sees the artist of light, but what he's painting has very little to do with the way light actually works in the real world. And some people adore that vision, and some artists generate really devoted enemies like Sally Mann. But there's a myth created by high profile cases that this perspective comes exclusively from suffering. I guess that's where I'm struggling right now, is it does come from suffering, but not only from suffering. Case in point, the bulk of commentary around the suicide of Chris Cornell a few years back. People like to believe in the tragic idea that artists are just too creative to get along in life, that their intricate, sensitive minds just can't cope. The truth is, everyone suffers, man, and most everyone handles it more or less well, according to studies. It's true, rates of drug abuse and depression and suicide among artists tend to be higher than the national average. There's no evidence that the art itself is related to any of these factors. Moreover, artists, performers, and athletes aren't even in the top 10 of at-risk professions for suicide. Anymore, it is the latest list from 2022. MDs, dentists, police officers, veterinarians, financial services agents, real estate agents, electricians, lawyers, farmers, and pharmacists. Dude, nowhere on the list is artists. We tend to glorify the suffering soul of the artist, yet we do not at all suggest that the fisherman needs their angst in order to be good at harvesting fish. We even less suggest that drug abuse is necessary to the life of the police officer. The point is, there are tens of thousands of entertainers, artists, dancers, writers, and athletes who are perfectly functional, at least within the usual boundaries of that definition. Their lives are banal. They're ordinary. They make things and flog them online like the rest of us do. They own cars, struggle to buy health insurance, eat at restaurants, watch basketball on TV, have relationships, gossip, and pay taxes. It's easy to list famous people who've died by suicide or drug overdose just because they're famous. Just because they're famous. This has always been the case. Hemingway was a famous drunk who ate his own shotgun, but few writers indulge in alcoholic despair, at least on average, and we only seem to care about them when they die. Consider Robin Williams. His career was in decline well before his suicide. He was down to making shit movies like RV. If he were as beloved as people claimed after his suicide, then he would still have been headlining edgy comedies and sneaking into more serious work as the serial killer. What's the one about the 1 hour photo? Was it called 1 hour photo? He was amazing. This isn't about crapping on the memories of famous people. It's to point out our tendency is to see them most clearly when tragedy strikes. Back to the unexpected death of Soundgarden's Chris Cornell. When I heard the news, I was hardly touched. I ran through a catalog of great music in my mind, and I thought, well, that's a shame. But when the shoe dropped that this was a suicide, a much stronger feeling was pulled from me, right from the chest. My work puts me in close touch with people who suffer. Any suicide is a tragedy. In the bigger picture, another high-profile celebrity suicide might add to this myth that artists need drugs or alcohol or despair to fuel the off-kilter perspectives that drive their artistry. I didn't know Chris. I didn't know his family. But for what it's worth, they'd have my most sincere sympathy. He was a person. For the rest of us, well, try to maybe have empathy for the man we lost, rather than glorify the problems. They're neither necessary nor sufficient to art. Try to take stock of the many great artists who are still among us, growing old in the most banal ways. Fred Rogers always said to look for the helpers after a tragedy, to sort of balance out your perspective so you're not focused on the shooter, right, and think everyone's bad. You're focused on the 100 people who came to help in the aftermath. You see that people are good. In a similar way, I'm saying something similar here. The dead draw headlines, and celebrity dead draw headlines, but the living vastly outnumber the 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 successful suicides. Yeah, I guess that's the best I can do.